As I stated last week, the last couple weeks, we spent some time working on kind of an introduction to the prophets in general. Now what I'm wanting to do is to start actually doing an introduction kind of for each of the prophets. Some of them are going to be lumped together, so we're going to have multiple introductions, probably specifically the minor prophets. With some of those, we'll cover multiple ones per session. But tonight I'm wanting to start with Isaiah. And Isaiah, we're going to just spend a class period just dealing with Isaiah the prophet as we introduce this one. I will ask that you bear with me to some degree. I'm in new territory. This isn't a study or a class that I have done before. So we are venturing, at least for me, into kind of uncharted waters doing some of these introductions. That being the case, there's absolutely no way that in 40 minutes I'm going to give the book of Isaiah the justice that it deserves. I mean, you can't talk about everything of importance. We're going to cover some things. We're going to look at a few passages. But when it comes right down to it, you can't study a 66-chapter book in 40 minutes. So we'll do the best that we can and cover some information. Some of it is going to be just information. Just saying, here's what's going on, here's what's happening, here's what the story is. Isaiah is the very first of what's called the writing prophets. Remember, we have the major prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, then Lamentations, which was also written by whom? Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and then we put Daniel in with the major prophets. And then following that, you have the Scroll of 12, or the minor prophets, as we called them. So we're going to go with Isaiah this evening. Kind of chosen, first of all, because he is the first of all of the writing prophets. Also, he is, at least in that category, of the earliest prophets. If you go to Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 1, he actually kind of gives the scope of his, I guess you could say, prophetic work. How long does he prophesy? What does it tell us there? Chapter 1, verse 1. Okay, who are those kings? All right, so first one was Uzziah, right? Then Hezekiah. All right. All right, that one's better. All right, so these are the four kings. Does anybody know about when we're talking about, time-wise? What's that? Okay, 740 to 700. Okay, where did you pull that? That's fair. All right, the notes that you wrote in the Bible. Boy, I really thought that I made a notation of these dates. So, anyway, yeah, why 740? chapter 6 and verse 1, I think. Chapter 6 and verse 1. What are we given? It's kind of a time stamp here, but it's a little more than just a time stamp. Okay, so the year of King Uzziah's death is the year that, what happens for Isaiah in chapter 6? Yeah, this is where Isaiah receives his calling. This is, we often call it the call of the prophet. This is where God comes to him and gives him special privileges of sorts, does something by which he then is going to send him out to be a prophet with a specific mission. So this is in the year. This doesn't mean that at this point in time Uzziah has died as of yet. It's just within that year that would have marked the time of Uzziah's death. For you history buffs, what is significant about Uzziah's reign? Maybe the year 740, although I would say 745 is probably going to stick in your head a little bit more. I don't know if there was an earthquake. Could have been. Lorraine asked if that was the year of the earthquake, potentially. From an international perspective, 745 is important because who came to power? Unless it's 755. It may be 755. I might be getting my dates mixed up. It's one of those fives. Who's the big power that is going to be an issue? Assyria, right? And Assyria's international power begins with the rise of a guy named Tiglath-Pileser. So when Tiglath-Pileser comes into power, and I have in my head it's 745. It might be 755. I didn't double check, look that up beforehand. But when he comes into power, he is going to take Assyria from just another nation and start to create what we would call today like a superpower, a great empire, is what he is creating. So this is especially important because this is at the tail end of Uzziah's reign. Uzziah really is going to be the last king of Judah that rules Judah as an important state that is not under the shadow of some other nation out there. Does that make sense? Well, I'm trying very hard to say he's not the last independent. I'm not saying he's whatever it was that you said. I'm gonna do a double negative here somewhere. Right. All of these, though, remember, even in the time of Hezekiah is the time in which, remember, Sennacherib came down and encircled it, but didn't take them over. So all of these kings reign over, it's an independent state. None of them are controlled by Assyria. Assyria never comes and overthrows Judah, but they live in the shadow of Assyria. And Assyria is, the big kid in town, the big bully that's there. And so basically this is a transitional period of time where we are now entering into a period of time where there will always be that superpower. Whether it is Assyria, and then it's going to be Babylon, from Babylon, Persia, from Persia, Greece, after Greece, Rome. And so there's always going to be this larger entity out there, And the political climate is going to be changed drastically after the time of Uzziah. Does that make sense? Yeah, Bruce?
Correct. Tiglath-Pileser was 745 to 727, according to the internet.
All right, very good. Well, the internet cannot lie, right? So, yeah. All right, thank you for fact-checking there. Yes, very good. Appreciate that. So, 745, when he comes to power, and it does. It changes the political climate to a brand new entity, a brand new way of looking at things that Israel and Judah have not really dealt with up to this point in time. So it makes sense that the time of these prophets begins as the political climate is shifting so drastically. All right. Mike 700. I don't know the significance of this number. Why? Because it was written in the Bible. Okay. All right. So you don't have any further notes with it? Or, yeah. Jeff? Uh-huh. Okay. 681 is the number that I would give, although for a little bit different of a reason, because Hezekiah, when does Hezekiah die? Anybody? I know, you guys are like, are you kidding me? I don't even know if I've read this before, right? Hezekiah's death is in 686. So the reign, if you start in the year of Uzziah's death and you run all the way through Hezekiah's death, you have it going all the way until 686. And yet, Jeff just said that his archaeological Bible provides 681. Probably most of your Isaiah intros will probably have 681. I agree with that. Why? Anybody know? Look at chapter 37. Isaiah chapter 37. And in a bit, we'll talk about what's going on, just very, very briefly, in this section. You'll note that it's a little bit different from a lot of the rest of Isaiah. Chapter 37 and verse 38. Who's being talked about in verse 38? All right, this is the account of the death of Sennacherib. You'll also find this account in the Kings as well. A lot of this is verbatim to some degree between them. The death of Sennacherib occurs in 681. So that leads people, and I'm part of that, to conclude that probably he is alive at least past 681 because he recounts the details of his death. Now, is it possible that somebody else, one of his students that was doing the collection, putting the things together, because we know Isaiah does it, and there's a statement, trying to remember exactly where it was. There's a statement that leads to believe, I want to say, well, I'm not even going to say it because it'll be wrong, that he had help with some of his students making a compiling of all of his oracles, putting them all together. Is it possible that after his death, after he'd finished, someone else added this tidbit that was known history and just copied it over from the history written in the King's account or something? It's possible. But I think the most likely scenario is to understand, as was stated, that 681 probably is the last historical marker that we have in the book of Isaiah. So we have historical markers that run from 740 all the way to 681. All right. So any questions on this? let me ask this. What kind of kings are these folks? Uzziah is kind of almost a non-issue because, we start at the end, right, of his reign. As far as Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. Jotham? All right. Not great, but he's not horrible. He's one of your, he's an okay king. I don't know if you were to read through the things, I'd have to go back and take a look at it. But his reign doesn't get as much attention in Isaiah's writings as these two. What about Ahaz? Good guy, bad guy? He's a pretty bad king. All right, and we talked some, did we not, recently, when we talked about the Syro-Ephraimite war and all of that stuff, which is, by the way, we pulled straight out of Isaiah and looking at that. Did he put his trust in God? No. Now, did he know the right words to say? Remember, he said, I'm not going to put the Lord, my God, Lord your God to the test, right? Remember when he said, hey, do this for a sign, or ask for a sign, or what, and he's like, I'm not going to put the Lord, my God, to the test. Yeah, that was a lack of faith. He had no faith, no trust. What about Hezekiah? Good king, bad king? Yeah, he's one of the bright spots, like one of the brightest spots. So this is what we're dealing with during this time period. All right, so we just mentioned some of the historical setting for this, and that would be the Syro-Ephraimite War. Can anybody tell me about the Syro-Ephraimite War? Anybody remember this discussion? Isaac, yes. What you got?
Wasn't Israel and Judah going to make an alliance or something? And didn't one of them say no?
Mm-hmm.
And then the one that didn't say no, the one that wanted is, that's about all I remember, except for one of them joined with another country to attack the other.
All right, very good. Good job, Isaac. Now I'm going to just kind of nuance that just a little bit, because you have here Israel, and then down here Judah, and then who's up here in this area? This is Syria, right? Or Aram, sometimes known as Aram. So Syria, Syro, and then Israel. What's another name for Israel? All right, Ephraim, right? So the Syro-Ephraimite War, where they saw Assyria gaining power over here, and they decided they wanted to create a coalition. Pekah and Rezin were the kings over here, and they came to Ahaz, and they said, hey, if we all band together, we might be able to stop these Assyrians. And what did Ahaz say? He said, no. Which you might think, okay, maybe who's he placing his trust in? Maybe he's trusting God, right? And he's like, I'm not going to make a coalition for you. I'm going to trust God is going to save me. And to some degree, when Isaiah comes to him, Isaiah is saying, yeah, this is the way that it should be. You should put your trust in God. Don't put your trust in these people. Except, was Ahaz really putting trust in God? No. Who was Ahaz putting his trust in? Assyria. These two have formed an alliance. They want to overthrow Ahaz and put their own puppet, a new king on the throne who will join them in their alliance. Ahaz says, no, or nope, not going to do it. And then he says to Assyria, hey, why don't we join forces? And, we will buddy up together. And if we do that, then we can beat this alliance. And what does Assyria say? They're like, oh, they're forming an alliance? Okay, we'll come deal with that. And by the way, yeah, we can be partners so long as what? So long as you pay incredibly huge tribute to us because, yeah, we're not equals. In other words, all he really did was turned Assyria's attention this direction. I read recently someone describing this, if you've got a mouse who's trying to fight other mouse, if he goes to the cat in order to come and help him against the other mice, who's going to win? The cat's going to be the only one left, right? That's the picture that is being painted here. So, he brings the attention down. This is what the Syro-Ephraimite War is all about. All kinds of tension. This is the rise of Assyria coming down into this area through the time of Ahaz and into the time of Hezekiah. All right, so let's talk about any questions on this that kind of gives us some of the time frame here, some of the structure of the book. By the way, it's not all the Syro-Ephraimite War. We just talked about Sennacherib, right? And so this also includes the invasion that's involved as well. With Assyria as they come down all the way into Jerusalem itself, all of that is kind of included. And not only that, but there does seem to be quite a bit in the early section that is forward-looking to what? Not just Assyria, but would you say, Lorraine? Oh, I thought you said something. I'm sorry. Oh, yes, there is absolutely a lot about Christ in the book of Isaiah. But as far as superpowers are concerned, there's mention not just of Assyria, but also Babylon. Babylon gets attention, even though, and they're way over here, even though they are years in the future. In fact, who else even gets mentioned? He even mentions Persia, which, would, anyway, not up here, but all of these people, you have Persia and Medes and everyone together against Babylon. And Cyrus, I believe it's Cyrus that he mentions by name, who's going to be the one that's going to let them come back. So all of this predictive stuff that is a part of the book of Isaiah. All right, let's put an outline to this. By the way, if you wanted to give a strict outline to this, if you wanted one, I've got a book that will provide a pretty good one, but it runs 2 or 3 pages, I believe, because there's so much stuff. Let me present perhaps a more simple outline, and then from there it can become more detailed as you would like for it to be. But there are 2 basic sections of Isaiah. What are they? How do they break down? If I bet right now there are some teens that are watching this online and they're like, oh yeah, this is how it is. Because we recently talked about this in our teen class, on Sunday mornings. Either that or they're all just like, oh man, we did talk about that, didn't we? Yeah, I have no idea. One of those two is the case. Yeah, Lorraine? Okay. Yep. Yeah. Yes. I mean, yeah, prophecy runs through most, but it really breaks down into two basic sections. Dale? Okay. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now, what is really interesting about these numbers, and by the way, there's nothing at all to say that Isaiah had this in mind or anything like that. I'm not suggesting that because chapter breaks don't come in until much later, right? He didn't write the chapter breaks. Yeah, John? Yeah. How many books are in the Bible? 66. John said there are 39 books in the Old Testament, 27 books in the New Testament. Did I say New Testament twice? Okay, I got it right. All right. So, yeah, a lot of people actually refer to the book of Isaiah as the little Bible. and to some degree, chapters 1 through 39, as Lorraine mentioned just a moment ago, have a tendency to really focus on judgment. They're all about the judgment that is taking place on the various nations and things such as that. And as Lorraine pointed out, they actually, was there someone back there? Oh, Dale? So, whatever, I'm giving you credit, Lorraine. I'm just going to keep going with it. So, yeah. Oh, okay. All right. But yeah, chapters 1 through 39 focus on the judgment, as Dale pointed out. Yes. And then chapters 40 through 66 really focus on what? Hope. That's a perfect word right there. The future, hope. Now, you're going to find hope in chapters 1 through 39. All right, that's not to say that the only thing that you will ever read about is judgment, 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 judgment. But there's a lot of it. And that really is the theme that runs the current, is all of the judgment, not just judgment on Israel and Judah, but judgment on various other nations are a part of that as well. But when you get to chapter 40 and you start moving through the end, this is where the idea of hope comes into play. Chapters 1 through 12 are focused on Judah and the conflict, the problems going on there. Chapters 13 through 23, judgment against the nations. So you have, first of all, first 12 chapters, Judah in their conflicts. 13 through 23 is judgment against the nations. Chapters 24 through 35 kind of have, and here's your $5 word for the evening, but I think you all are familiar with this one, eschatological. Is that a word we're good with? Stuff dealing with the end times, right? There's going to be an eschatological focus through a lot of that. And then this one, I know Lorraine is the one that pointed this out. It ends by looking at an historical interlude. There's like this thing that goes into prose, that leaves the poetic writing. And we were just there a moment ago looking at the death of Sennacherib. That was in the midst of the ending. Chapters 36 through 39 is a look at historical things that are taking place. You get into chapter 40 and things turn into looking at hope. First of all, hope in release from captivity. You see that chapters 40 through 48 is a release from captivity. Chapters 49 through 57 deal with the servant of the Lord. And in the midst of that, 49 through 57, what famous passage deals, it's part of what we call the servant songs? Yeah, Isaiah 53. How many of y'all are familiar with Isaiah 53? That's where Isaiah 53 comes into play. And by the way, it's very hard not to see Jesus in Isaiah 53, right? It's clear that as you move through the four servant songs, that when you finally get to the fourth and final one, he has clearly honed in on a single individual who's going to serve as the servant of the Lord, and that being the future Messiah. So you have that chapters, let's see, 49, 57, then 58 to 66, the last section is the restoration of Zion. In the midst of this, at least at the very end of this, chapters 65, 66, deal with a theme that runs throughout the Bible. Peter alludes to it, but really especially John at the end of Revelation talks about the new heaven and the new earth where righteousness dwells. That comes from Isaiah chapters 65 and 66. So, all of that is kind of the breakdown. If you could just remember this. This is the most important thing to remember about the breakdown of Isaiah. In fact, that's kind of why I didn't even write the other stuff, because I didn't want this to get lost. Because I think this is easy to remember, right? Isaiah breaks down just like the books of the Bible do. And you have judgment, which is kind of an Old Testament-y type of a theme, compared to hope in the Messiah, which is kind of a New Testament-y kind of a thing, right? So it really breaks down really well. So just you'll be able to remember that. All right, let's talk about authorship. For most, I think, of us, there's really not much of a discussion here. Who wrote this? Isaiah the prophet, right? Kind of the end of the story, isn't it? I'm going to, well, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to very briefly mention some things that you might run into because in scholarship, liberal critical scholarship, is that a phrase you guys are familiar with, liberal critical scholarship? All right. I'm just going to give you guys a pop quiz real quick, just to determine where you are as far as knowing, like, German scholarship in the 1800s and things like that, what was going on. Are any of you familiar with the JEDP theory? Does that sound familiar to anyone? Okay. All right. So Wellhausen. Okay. All right. Not a problem, by the way. This is not an issue at all. I just wanted to get a very good gauge of how much to talk about this. I'll be very brief then. Liberal critical scholarship, there was a huge push in the 1800s coming out of Enlightenment, rational thought, rationalism. Let's try to get to the real Bible is basically it. They said God, there is no God is kind of the basis of it. There is no supernatural. Or if there is a God, he's a deist God. He's not a real God. He's not active in the world. He's just kind of set things in motion a long time ago, wound up, the spring, and then let it go. And so the world's just been on its own since then. That was one of the most popular versions of that day. And so they say, well, let's figure out Who really wrote, say, the first 5 books of the Bible? And that's where they come up with the JEDP theory. Each of those letters represents a different authorship. And that somebody along the way found the different authors in their different places, and they said, well, let's just cram all of these together. And so there's different authors. Moses clearly couldn't have written it all. It just wouldn't make any sense. And again, I'm giving very, very, very brief on this. It's a bunch of nonsense, really. And I think scholarship is coming out of that and really seeing that it's a bunch of nonsense. By the way, how many of y'all have heard of the search for the historical Jesus? The real Jesus. That one is more popular. That's even still around today, where people are like, who is the real Jesus? Not the one that the people here in the Bible portrayed, because, well, they're just a bunch of biased people that wrote history as they wanted it. Let's find the grains of truth out of what they wrote to find who he really was. Y'all familiar with that aspect? Okay, that's what they were doing with the Old Testament. So, with Isaiah, they've come to the conclusion that one person wrote this, someone else wrote this. Some people would say, I think, the third section, that there is a third Isaiah, 58 through 66, I think is the breakdown, that you have different authors. And they just accredited the whole thing, but they can't all be written by the same guy. And a lot of the reason they say that is because, look at this, judgment, over and over. The style, the language, what he says, what he does, all of that, even the time frame, is so much different from this. Can you see how much different this is? And they say, well, this, right here, he's talking about events that are way in the future. And there's no way that Isaiah, in his day and time, could have possibly been able to say the things that you find in here, clearly, because remember, do they believe in a God that gives supernatural information? No, they don't. And so they have to find natural explanations for things, such as a man who's able to predict so well exactly what's going to take place way in the future. Does that make sense? So they present stylistic differences, language differences, other things like that. And they say, look, it wouldn't make sense for him to actually talk about these future events that weren't in his day. And they also say that this represents more the period of the exile. That is when they've gone into Babylon and then when they return. Jerusalem fallen, the people are gone. That seems to be what this message is for. Now, I hope you understand, I say all this, I don't buy this, right? You guys understand that? I don't think that's accurate. But if you start digging and reading and pulling up commentaries or whatever the case might be and start reading through this, you will see this. And you'll say, wait, what is going on? What is happening? Why are they having this? Is there a response that we can give for the differences in tone, language, style, things such as that? Yeah, Kevin? Well, if I can repeat your answer very quickly.
I guess I was just thinking about some authors that write books even today.
Uh-huh.
There are some who can write in different styles and genre of books, fiction or nonfiction, and they can use all different kinds of words because they're good writers.
Yeah.
And so just from a what we know standpoint of today, that is possible from that aspect, just from a very, I don't know,
Yeah.
literary point of view.
It's pretty narrow-minded, isn't it, to assume that an author is only allowed to write in a certain way and only use certain words? I mean, that's not fair to an author, isn't it? Consider, this is the same thing, by the way, that they do with Paul in 2 Corinthians. In 2 Corinthians, you get up to a certain point and everything seems to flow one way, and then you get to the end, chapters 10, 11, and 12, the end of 2 Corinthians, and they're like, wow, this is totally different. Somebody else must have wrote this, and they have tacked this on, as the case might be. Or, as some would say, maybe this is a separate letter that was sent out. And it got tacked on to the end of this right here, but it's not even the same letter. And again, that's not fair. I think with Paul, maybe the most would be like the, good grief, pastoral epistles. Many people reject that Paul wrote 1st, 2nd Timothy, and 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus, because the language is so different. The way that he talks, things that he does are different. But he's accomplishing a different purpose. So of course what he's doing would be different. He's allowed to use more than just a certain set of words, right? And this go into what Kevin was saying. Good authors are able to use more than just a certain set of words. So I think this argument, it's a really bad one, where you're boxing somebody in and saying you have to conform to what we believe that you would write, or else we don't believe that you wrote it. Yeah, Ryan?
Say that, he's inspired. He was called as a prophet who has a direct connection to God, where we don't. And so he's if he's
Well, we do need to be careful of assuming that because he's inspired, then the words that he uses are not his words. Because the prophets and the New Testament, all of them, they write in their own way.
Yeah.
Inspiration does not mean that they simply write out what God is dictating. I can't tell you exactly how it works, but the difference between the various writers and the way that they write things means that each of these writers are writing in their own style, their own language, their own words. They're writing the Word of God, but it's 100% God, but it's also 100% them.
And I agree with that. I'm just saying that he, if he's being guided to deliver a certain message, and then that message changes as time goes on, and new things arise in the culture or politics or whatever that he needs to confront, then he is being guided in that direction.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and that's kind of what we're seeing right here. Your language around judgment is going to sound a whole lot different than your language about hope, is it not? You will use a different style. You will use different words. You will write differently. And that's, I think, exactly what Ryan is saying. With a different message comes a whole new set of parameters that you will use to deliver that. So they're just bad arguments, really. They're not fair to anybody who is writing by saying, here's the box you have to live in. Also, all ancient traditions put all of this together as one. Nobody, nothing, anywhere, there is nothing until the 1800s by which anybody ever said, there must be different authors for this. All right, that's kind of telling to me. You would think that if somebody different from Isaiah wrote this, that would be hard to keep a secret, wouldn't it? This is done so well that you have such an incredible writer, somebody who's a prophet, someone inspired, someone who wrote a pretty big chunk of the Bible, and they are completely otherwise unknown. That's a hard pill to swallow. Let me make sure. And also, I think a lot of this stems from a recognition. One of the main reasons they're doing this is to simply get around the inspiration of God. And that is not a viable reason, I don't think, to just simply eliminate something. That's based on a certain specific bias that they have, and an unfounded bias as well. So, all of that to say, I don't buy into the change. And for some of y'all, you're like, yeah, well, we didn't even need to have that discussion. Probably so. But I wanted to make you aware, just in case one or two of you might dig into some of these commentaries and things. All right. We're almost out of time. Let me talk about, just very quickly, we don't have time to go through these passages, but some key passages that I think are really important. Isaiah's call in chapter 6, I think, is really important. Remember, what did Isaiah say when God called him? Here I am, send me. All right? What did Isaiah say first? I am a man of unclean lips, right? Now, before he was sent out, before he was willing, before he said, here I am, send me, you have this moment in chapter 6, verse 6. One of the seraphim flew to me, and his hand was a glowing coal. He'd taken from the altar with his tongs, and he touched my mouth with it, and said, now that this has touched your lips, your iniquity is removed, your sin is atoned for. All right. Understand that this is not a universal statement for everybody to say, here I am, send me. That misses the point of the special nature of the prophets, the special nature of Isaiah's calling, and ultimately what it is that Isaiah is going to be doing. Because it required, before Isaiah could fulfill the role that he was going through, it required this supernatural meeting with God in which his mouth, very specifically, the mouth was cleansed, purified through this burning ember, this burning coal, so that his mouth could send forth the message that was being given to him. This is not something that I or anybody here is able to replicate. And I think it's important that we understand we're not called to be Isaiah. None of us are called to be, here I am, send me, in the same way that Isaiah was. And when you look at all the things that Isaiah has to go through, as well as other prophets, I think we can be thankful for that. Because we don't want to have to travel the path that these men traveled. Chapters 7 through 9. Yeah, Kevin?
Statement. I'm sorry, there's a lot that's behind this particular statement. There's a lot of consequences to this statement of saying, here am I, send me. But this is something that we have used in other contexts relating to our lives. And so I guess my question is, are you saying that it's inappropriate for us to use this particular verse in some kind of quoting format to express a desire that we would have to have that same type of attitude in whatever service we can do.
I would be uncomfortable using this. Yeah, I think so. I think that misses the very peculiar, special nature of what's happening right here. Now, that does not detract from the fact that we are called in other ways to do other things in the New Testament, particularly with our zeal and evangelism, which is, I think, probably the way that this is often brought up and used and talked about. So, yeah, is there something about saying I want a good spirit to do this? Sure. But I would be uncomfortable teaching and saying, hey guys, Isaiah chapter 6, this should be us, because this is a very special thing that Isaiah went through. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, your last statement there about Isaiah and the hot coal in his mouth, is that where the spitting fire comes in when you have prophecies?
Well, are you talking about like in Acts chapter 2?
Well,
with the
anywhere
fire,
in the
the
Bible where there's
tongues of fire?
where there's condemnation for various things.
Oh, I wouldn't make that connection there. With that as a scathing rebuke. Ryan, Kevin's got something more. That it wouldn't be, that would be it. This is a purifying, cleansing fire to prepare the prophet for what he's going to do. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
I'm going to pass for now. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So, now, again, I'm just telling you, I would feel uncomfortable to teach and use this. I think that it detracts from the very special, peculiar nature of Isaiah and Isaiah's call. And I think there's something to the fact that until his lips were purified, he wouldn't say, "Here I am, send me." But remember, after that he says, all right, go and say to these people. So he sends them out to do this work, and gives some untils. Now, all right, we can have further conversation on that. I just want to bring out just a couple, just very quickly. Chapters 7 through 9, highly messianic. We've talked about a little bit of this, with the sign of the virgin birth. And we looked at it in its context. But Matthew uses that and looks and says, hey, this kind of is a picture over here of the Messiah. We mentioned chapter 53, the last of the servant songs, and then mentioned 65, 66, the new heavens and new earth. All right. So that is Isaiah in a horribly not done well, because there's just not enough time to talk about everything that's important in Isaiah way. Any final questions or comments before I turn this over to Jeff? All right. I will not. No, I'll be here next week. Yeah, it's Wednesday. I won't be here. Yeah, I'll be back and next week, and I haven't decided if I'm going to move through the major prophets or if I'm going to keep in the chronological time frames and maybe talk about Micah or so next. So, thanks a lot. Good discussion. Turn it over to Jeff now.